Good to see him. Like I
Hey,
think I
honey,
have.
Washte. This is
Oh, good.
ToksaHour. I am Maggie Ross, and I am live from Porcupine, South Dakota. As the saying goes, every Sunday morning, I'm telling you that I live along the Porcupine Creek where the porcupines roam. And maybe live. We don't have porcupine trees because there's no such thing, so I can't say that. Anyways, this morning I am very, very excited and honored to have a special guest. There should be two special guests, but right now we have one, and I think the other one will log in a little bit later. So I have Jamal Stofani. Am I saying that right? Stofani?
We could just say Jamal. We could just use, yeah, don't use the last name just yet. Yeah, Jamal. Jamal's good. I prefer the informal introduction.
Well, I want to just call you JBS.
Yeah, go for it. Whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm totally cool. Like
Yeah,
that. I'll even I'll change it. I'll change it on the thing to JBS TikTok Dad, just so that you have some
yeah,
familiarity.
yeah.
JBS
So,
TikTok.
JBS is my friend from TikTok, and we were just talking a little bit earlier about how we got to know each other, and he's a pretty good wizard about things. And so I met him on his face or his TikTok live, and he was talking about how to help with finances. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to him, let him introduce himself. He is a Palestinian American, and he is a great person. So okay, JBS.
Thank you. Yeah, man, we were just talking about how only 2 months ago we met when I was doing, lives on banking tips, interviewing skills, and resume writing. And so, well, again, we'll just go by JBS. Whoever's watching, JBS or Jamal. My parents named me Jamal after my father's uncle, and so I am Palestinian, born in Jordan, came to the States at the age of 6. And so I've been here since 1978. We initially moved out to the West Coast, grew up my entire life, grew up in Southern California, went to all the local schools, joined the military at the age of 18, right out of high school from 89 to 97. I served in the Marine Corps. Simultaneously, I was on active duty during the first Gulf War, but then I was right after I got out of the Gulf War, I was went to undergrad and received my degree in speech communication and got into financial services banking. Started off as a teller in 1994, a company called Great Western Bank, and been in the financial services industry now going on 30 years. And then at the age of 50, which was a couple of years ago, I decided to go get my graduate degree from USC in business. And so I got that 2 years ago. Been married for almost 25. This May will be 25 years. We've got four beautiful children, 12, 19, 22, actually, and 23. And my daughter goes to ministry school up north at Bethel in Redding, California. Parents were both, my father was born in Palestine in 1923. So he married late in life at the age of 42. And he was 20 years older than my mom. So both parents have passed since then. And I still have family living back home. Father didn't have right of return. His land was confiscated because he served in the military for 25 years under British rule because he left early in life to join the military, and then ultimately when he decided to come back, didn't have right of return. And I'm one of four siblings. My brother is older than I am, lives in California with me, and then I've got two younger sisters living in the Midwest in Texas. And so I'm so glad to be here, and that's me in a nutshell. And so whatever you have on the agenda, Maggie, let's rock and roll, as they say.
I know. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. It's really email is almost like snail mail. My granddaughter's at my bedroom door trying to get in.
That's all
She's
good.
my my granddaughter she's like born on Doksha Hour. She I
Wow.
started Doksha Hour, me and my niece, about 3 years ago during the pandemic. It's like there's no information. And so she's just a little bitty baby. So everybody that views ToksaHour, they're gonna know Nevaeh when she's when she's a
Very.
big girl. They can say, "Hey, we saw you."
She, she's
Remember, you
she's
know,
part
bushy
she's part
hair.
of the she's part of the movement.
Yeah.
Part of the movement. Share information. That's cool.
Um, you know, JBS, there's like on TikTok, there's so much information and so much education about what is actually happening in Palestine.
Yeah.
We know that in the Facebook world, it's really slow, or the algorithms are really shut down. Like
Right.
you could share information, but it doesn't show up on anybody's news feed. You have to actually go to someone's news feed or go to their profile and see their information and then share it. But even
Yeah.
in your share, somebody has to actually go to your page, see it, and share it. Like they're really slowing down information. And so that's been a big concern for me for my people, or the people that tune into Doksha Hour, is that
Mhm.
what is the truth? You know, like what is really happening? Because a lot of times our own politicians, and you know this, you're an American too. You know,
Yeah.
our own politicians are not telling us what the truth is, or they just gloss over.
Yeah. No, I think I don't think you're absolutely right. I think Meta in general has shadow banned quite a bit. I mean, look, they took Sean King off Instagram, and Sean King is a huge activist, and he was showing videos that you normally wouldn't see in the Western media. And I often use this phrase that we've been under this veil of deception of what's actually happening in the Gaza Strip in the West Bank. And I always share this when I come on any platform. I've got to show some vulnerability as well because I thought I knew what was going on based on stories my father used to tell me, from 1917 to right before he passed away in 2012. But to the extent that I know today, maybe 120 plus days, that I've had to read books, articles, join different platforms to just educate myself on what's actually happening has been a transformation. And I always say also that it's not a criticism of the Jewish community; it's a criticism of this right wing government. For those that don't know, that are led by Bibi, Mostrich, and Gavir, three of individuals who've been indicted for various felonies. And you can look all this up. So I'm not telling you anything that you can't fact check. And so it has been a tough road for the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians. And so there's so much information out there. And I think that's the reason I do the book club, Maggie. I think on Tuesdays and Thursdays when I read Elon to all of you. Now I'm going through Rashid Khalidi's book. I think that's the way to cascade the information outside of outside of just going to someone's feeds, but also entrenching yourself in the homework. Because I don't rely just on the platforms to give me what I need. Otherwise, I would be shortchanging us. Yes, that's the book that we're reading now. Otherwise, I'd be shortchanging myself and the viewers that I try to cascade information to. But what you're doing today, broadening my network becomes your network and vice versa. You're broadening the platform so people have a true understanding of what's been happening. And so, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. But I appreciate you bringing me here today and would open in whatever questions you have, and then we can field some questions from the group as well.
I really do enjoy the book club. I actually bought that book through what is it called? Audiobooks, anyways, Amazon's audiobook thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then now I'm boycotting Amazon. So
Oh, well,
I
that's why
can't do the listen.
I got it through I got it through Google Books. That's what I did at Google Play. So because I did the same thing, I'm like, wait a minute, let me go through Google Play because I have an HP, and I was like, let me research how I can get it. And this is Google Play will let you download it on an HP. So I'm like, all right, cool. So that's how I did it. But I'm your audiobook. So
Yeah,
I'm your audiobook.
I did so I've been ordering books. I use I think it's called Thrift Books.
Oh, good.
And it's a recycled book place, but I also found out that BAM does not um, support Israel. Like they're not connected to anybody, any Zionist, anybody. So that book I bought because I can't I mean, I paid for it already, the audio, but I'm just being ornery because I'm boycotting Amazon now. So I don't want to go in there and I don't want to listen to it. And so I went to BAM and because they said they had it and you were starting the book club and I'm like, I got to get the book. So I went there
Cool.
and got it.
Well, that book club was the brainchild of a beer who said, "Hey, you should start a book club." I'm like, hmm, I can read. I think I can do that, and so I'm glad it's kind of growing, and I hope it continues to grow because we'll definitely dive into other spaces. And now that I know you have a PhD in that space, we're gonna have to lean on you for some wisdom as well. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I usually just try to listen, all with the Palestinian lives. I just listen. I like to listen and educate myself. I'll tell you what kind of caused me in my life journey. When I was younger, I always was curious, or I wondered why white people were so mean. Like, why did they
Mm,
come here and why did they do that to us?
right.
And so then when I went to college, I went into history. I became a history major. And so I studied history and I studied it all the way back to the Middle East. And so I know fairly a good amount of information about the Middle East and what is happening there and with the Palestinians. And I knew right away when Israel was trying to say, or the Zionists were trying to say about the Palestinians, that this was their land. Like I'm like, history does not say that.
Right.
The
And the argument that you know 2,000, 3,000 years ago that belonged to your land, and you come to my father or my grandparents and my uncles and say, hey, 3,000 years ago, even though you're not the indigenous people, because there were indigenous Jewish people on that land, okay, you got to leave now, just is a fallacy at its core. And so I think that's a great place to start. Because let's fast forward 2,000 years, right? Let's fast forward to 1880 Zionist movement, and then Herzl, and we can start there. I think it's a good place to start. And what I share, and I don't know how many viewers you have, Maggie, but I think what's important is when the caveats that I always share is what I provide you are highlight reels of information. So when I give you dates and names, your responsibility is to go back and do the research so that you have a full picture. And so based on the British mandate or the Balfour Agreement written out by Lord Balfour in 1917, there was a promise to the Jewish community to have a land of their own. And under the British Empire, the mandate of Palestine was the one that was chosen between many others. And so, but we can even go back a little further to 1899, I think, when Al Khalidi had written a letter to Herzl asking him of his intentions, whether he felt he was going to consider the inhabitants of or Palestine at the time under the Ottoman Empire. And you know, Herzl was a bit dismissive in terms of what his intentions were. Like, no, yeah, we're going to consider the inhabitants, for lack of a better phrase. And after Herzl died, I think 1904, and then after the British Empire took over Mandate Palestine, then you have Lord Balfour promise the Jewish community a land. And without the consultation of the existing inhabitants. Now, the Palestinians comprised of the Jewish community, of the Arab community, and so Christians and Muslims, right? Christians, Muslims, and Jews were on the land. And so they weren't consulted on the partition of the land. And World War One happens, and so that never comes to fruition simply because of World War One. And so as we move in time, then we have, now you have revolts in the 20s and the 30s, specifically 1936, where there's an uprising and a revolt against the partition of the land because there was an imbalance in how it was going to be partitioned. And then the arguments like, how can you offer our homeland without our consultation. These are the Palestinians speaking as such. And so there's a revolt. And yes, there was infighting between Palestinian families because of their course of action as to how to combat the Zionist movement. And under the Ottoman Empire, Al Husseini, who feared the Zionist movement, was also selling land to the Jewish community or to the Zionist movement. And so as we get closer to World War II, we know that there's communication from David Ben Gurion, who was one of the leading Zionist leaders of the Zionist movement, at one point in time in 1938 to the Jewish Agency, uh, was quoted saying, I don't see anything wrong with a compulsory transfer, a forceful transfer. There's nothing immoral with it. And so we see the beginnings of the systematic process of ethnic cleansing of Mandate Palestine, which ultimately comprised over 531 villages, close to 800,000 to a million Palestinians, those who have families now in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And so we get to the British Empire's involvement, right? So now we're under the British Empire, Palestine Mandate, and you have immigration from the Jewish community across uh, Europe simply because for fear of persecution, which obviously no one should be subjected to oppression or persecution at all. And so as we see this movement, there isn't a large number of immigration though. And I'll talk about how David Ben Gurion, as he articulated to a lot of his at least most Charette, one of his commanders abroad, how he feared uh, a couple of scenarios that were a facade in order to get the Jewish community to immigrate. And so we get through. We have this group of Jewish community who is unarmed, untrained, but under the tutelage of Ord Wingate, I give you another name, a British officer who started to train these Jewish, ultimately militia who became the Haganah, and Haganah is a Hebrew word for defense, who became the Haganah, and then eventually were involved in World War II. And one of the basics that they didn't know how to use was the bayonet. That that action itself resonates quite a bit because I've heard it often touted. And so as they trained through World War II, now we're kind of moving forward beyond World War II. And so we already know that the British Empire said, look, we're going to give a land to the Jewish community who we were paying them back for the persecution of the Schmazis. There's nothing wrong with giving someone land as long as you're including the inhabitants of that land. There was never effective involvement. Let's say that effective involvement. It was kind of here's what you're going to do. Here's the order. Here's what's going to happen. And so once World War II ended, we have the establishment of the UN, right? 1947, I believe. And the UN had established this body called UNESCO, who eventually parodied or partitioned the land under Resolution 191. 2 years later, the UNESCO had never partitioned any land; they'd never had this issue to begin with. And I'm giving you a lot of high-level overview stuff, so I'm giving you dates, timelines. And so I think in November of 1947, Resolution 181 was adopted without the presence of Palestinian leaders because during the 1936 revolt of the Palestinians, a lot of the notables were exiled. And so the Palestinians boycotted 181 because the way it was partitioned in three parts was unfair to the existing inhabitants. So when you look at Resolution 181, you have 44% of the land going to roughly 800,000 inhabitants, the Palestinians, and where there was only a 10,000 number of Jews in that part of the land. 56% of the land was going to roughly 400,000 Jews. So you see the disparity in distribution here. And then there was a substantial amount of Palestinians that were having to occupy only 44%. And then 200,000, the third partition, was to be distributed equally between the Jews and the Palestinians, and that was Jerusalem. So under 181, in this fairly new body, in its infancy stages, it just seemed unfair to the Palestinians, which is right, is true. So now you have David Gurion, Ben Gurion, who aspired to have mandate Palestine, not just 56% plus the already close to 6% that they had. He wanted 78 to 80%. Because in order to have a predominantly Jewish state, the demography has to be higher in terms of the Jewish community. Because you can't have a Jewish state if your demography is outbalanced. So if you have more Palestinians, how can you call it a Jewish state, right? And so this is where the Red House comes in. And for those of you listening, the Red House was the meeting point for David Ben Gurion, his intimate group, which he called the consultancy, and primarily Workers' Council, and ultimately became the Haganah's headquarters, the militia group, if you will. They were the militia. And in 1947, ultimately became the headquarters for the kibbutzim in Tel Aviv. This Red House no longer exists. And so, and systematically, through the support of the Jewish Fund that was established in 1901, through the Hebrew University, who had the village files for all the Palestinian villages that thrived in agriculture, that thrived in water access, that also identified notables in those villages who could have been part of the revolt, right? And this was recommended by Brian Zion Luria, who was an employee of the Hebrew University, and which ultimately passed the Jewish files to Joseph Weitz. Yes, Joseph Weitz, who led and was the catalyst to the expulsion of all these Palestinian families. And they were also the custodian that prompted the purchase of property under absentee landlords. So you owned a property, but you lived abroad. I can buy the property from you. So they would do that, and whoever was living was forcefully kicked out. They couldn't stay. And so so I'm going to get you to the systematic planning, or what they call Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, and ultimately culminated in Plan D, or Plan Delet. And you all can pull up Plan Delet through various archives. Plan Delet was finalized on March 10th, 1948 in the Red House. And that plan had allocated resources in terms of Jewish commanders, which one of them was Yitzhak Rabin, among many others, Yigal Allon, to each of the villages that were identified in rank order on those Jewish files, along with ground forces or Jewish commanders on the ground, to systematically unalive, expel Palestinians through various means: psychological warfare, leaflets, as you see today, right? You have shoot. I say unalive. I don't know what Facebook friendly conversation is, but unalive, pew-pewing, and then demolition of homes to completely erase or ethnic cleanse Palestinian culture and identity. And once you were identified as a village that was thriving, that had tremendous access to various resources, those Palestinians were expelled, and some of those Palestinians were unalived, and oftentimes it was men between the ages of 10 to 50, and unalived on the spot, and some were separated from families. And so you go through the systematic expulsion of all these villages, up to 531. And to prevent the inhabitants from returning to the villages, they would put dynamite in the rubble, right? And these are things that have been discussed through Ilan Pape, who's an Israeli historian, through his book, Miko Peled, who was a former IDF soldier. You can read Rashid Khalidi's book, and we'll get into that even more so. I think you've heard the first couple of chapters. And you can look at various other Israeli historians, and we provide you those names. So through systematic expulsions, unaliving of families, through the Deir Yassin massacre, Hessas massacre, Tantura massacre, Kadrit massacre, Haifa massacre, and remember, you will read the Israeli narrative as saying that the Zionist movement went into an arid land. It was dry, it wasn't thriving, and that's completely false, because if you go to Tel Aviv Jaffa, who was thriving in citrus and theater, um, and many other villages known for their olive trees, right? Known for their olive trees. Um, these were thriving villages and thriving communities. I mean, look, in every community, whether it's the U.S. And other parts of the globe, there are your thriving communities and there are your underserved communities. That's a given. But to say it was an arid land and nobody was thriving, it was desert, and we rebuilt it is completely a false narrative. And so, and this systematic expulsion, I think, finished up roughly at the end of December 1949, December 1949. And so the argument is always from the Zionist perspective is that, well, again, nothing against the Jewish community, right? It is the ideology of the Zionists to have an ethno state, ethno religious state, which does not include Palestinians. And I'll share the demographic, how demography comes into play later on, but to completely have an ethno state. And so, that's the argument. And so on March 14th, 1948, when declared its independence, and then it was recognized by the USSR and the US, then we have the surrounding Arab countries attacking. It wasn't like they attacked first, and then that's when they claimed their independence. The independence was claimed, recognized by the UN, recognized by those two global powers at the time, and so the surrounding Arab countries attacked. Mind you, the attack, for the exception of two countries, did not engage the full army, especially in the Hashemite kingdom under King Hussein, because King Hussein had negotiated with the Zionist leaders that if he got the West Bank, he would refrain from engaging his full army, right, in parts of Jerusalem. And the reason he got Jordan, and for those of you listening in Jordan and Iraq, was because of his loyalty to the British Empire during the First World War. His aspirations were to have Jordan, Iraq, and Syria because it was thriving in agriculture, but the French mandate ended. Therefore, Syria was back to self-rule. And so he got the West Bank. And he promised that if he got the West Bank, he would not engage his full army, although he engaged the Iraqi legionnaires to repel the militia, which was at the time not only the Haganah, the Irgun, the Stern Gang, and the Palmach, which is a commando unit, from taking over what was promised to him through the Zionists. And ultimately, he gave that back up in 1967, as did the Egyptians give back the Gaza Strip in 1967. So you have Jordan, who's got one of the most powerful armies at this point between Iraq and the Jordanian army, not fully engaged. And you have Palestinians who were rebelling against the expulsions, but not effectively, simply because their weaponry was not that of it was antiquated versus the Haganah, the Irgun, and all these other militias that had weaponry from abroad, from Yugoslavia to be. I think it's Yugoslavia is where they bought their weaponry, and so ultimately these militias who committed T attacks on numerous villages became what we call today the IDF. So the Haganah, the Stern Gang, the Irgun, and the Palmach became the IDF today. So underneath each of these, there's a brigade, and each of these brigades were involved in the massacres. And Tontura is one documentary you all should watch. These are testimonials by IDF soldiers that talk about their atrocities firsthand. And the Sons of Alabun is another one. That's another one that talks about what happened to the Sons of Alabun. And so my grandfather and my uncle were two of the individuals in one of those villages that are included in various archives that were killed execution style, pulled up, put against the wall, hoods on, and killed on the spot. And my father told that story quite frequently. And even in the book that I read by I think Elon, the name of the commander that my father used to mention regularly was in Elon's book. And I didn't know how to pronounce it because my father's second language is English. And I'm like, what's the name of this individual? And all of a sudden I see the spelling. I'm like, that's who my father was talking about all these years, right? And so that's kind of high level overview of what's been happening. And we all know that Gaza and the West Bank under military rule, but led by Fatah and the Fatah movement in the PLO, but Gaza has been under occupation since 2005, since the settlers moved out of Gaza. Now, mind you, one of the under the Oslo Accords, that was the agreement with Ariel Sharon to move out of the Gaza Strip, the to allow them to have a thriving, society. But when you pull out of a of Gaza, that didn't mean that they would not have control, because they have control of the community registry. Israel has control of the air, the sea, and you can't fish, so you can't export, import. Then they demolish the airport, and so you can't have exchange that gives you great resources for income or even improve your GDP. And now, at some point, Gaza was thriving in GDP, but as Israel continued to apply forceful occupation, the GDP for Gaza is diminished significantly. And we know that Hamas is touted today as a T group, but there were 5 different years where they came up to present a peace solution that Israel rejected. Uh, and look, and so this is where we are today. And the type of occupation that we see today, I wasn't aware of how difficult it's been. And when you and like for those of you listening, imagine being surrounded by you're in a cul-de-sac, and in this cul-de-sac you have these walls around you. Let's just say, yeah, let's just hypothetically say 30 feet high, but then you have these cameras pointing in, right? And you're supposed to have your own economy, yet you use the currency of Israel. And so when you talk to various Zionists, well, it's not under occupation, we left. No, you left because you didn't want the demography to be imbalanced. Because if you think about it, and it was part of the Oslo Accords, had the settlers stayed in Gaza, now we have 2.3 million Palestinians there, even diminished more. And so now you're part of Israel. So the demography now is in balance. You have more Palestinians than you do Jews in Israel. So it's not really a Jewish state. And so that's part of the reason they pulled out, but yet restricted movement beyond belief. I know that was a lot, and so I hope that was helpful.
Well, Palestine's been around for a very long time, so it takes a lot, a lot of telling.
It does.
And I thank you for that. A lot of, like I said, the misinformation is at such a great level that even the American government is propagandizing this. And so we have a hard time understanding what is real and what is not real.
Yeah.
And and it's no different, like as American Indians, our Lakota people, our Native Americans, we go through a lot of the very same things.
Mhm.
We are propagandized, we are stereotyped, we too are animals, we're savages, we are those things too.
I know, you speak the truth. I remember growing up in the States. I went to middle school in the mid or early '80s, and it was an indoctrination. Well, the history books was we'd always say it's after I've gotten older. We used to say it's his story. It's not the people's story. It's his story, and the his story is the Western media, and the veil of deception that we've all been under through indoctrination is not obviously not new. I mean, even during that period during the Nakba, the Western media knew what was going on. There are articles in the New York Times that knew what was going on in Nakba. The British forces stood by idly watching these events. And so we've, and here we are again in 2024, and we have an administration who's pacifying their constituents and sharing narratives that we could put them side by side, picture in picture. Like, here's your narrative, here are the actions. Like, for the love of God, can you not see the actions? How badly are you under this control? Like the the I would say 90% of the globe or the court of public opinion has completely changed towards what Israel is today. And I'm saddened by that for a couple of reasons, because it's not definitely the Palestinians, our people have been impacted tremendously. The lives have been lost. But now Bibi and his right wing government, who's filled with criminals, have also impacted the Jewish community, right? The court of public opinion has completely changed. And to be in that to be in that space, like what are you doing for your people other than creating or elevating more hatred, right? And and I saw an article, I actually posted it, Haaretz yesterday posted it, that Israelis were protesting for Bibi to go. You're not doing anything for us. You're not protecting our hostages. You're not helping our people. And I always ask the questions like, what's one effective thing that your government has done to retrieve the hostages? One effective thing, right? And we can go on and talk about administrative detention in Israel for Palestinians. And for those of you that don't know, Israel has the only military court for for youth. The only military court for youth. You can look at this up under Military Court Watch. There's stats there that reference how many individuals that are underage have been tried without due process, and military court, and then administrative detention is if Maggie did something wrong. Let's just say Maggie threw a rock and hit a tank or a jeep, or let's say Maggie didn't do anything wrong. We didn't like her social media posts. I can take her to administrative detention without due process, and I can let her out. I can bring her back for another 6 months for the same offense without due process, alleged offense. So that's what Palestinians have been going through. And there are articles to reference this. Again, look up administrative detention, look up military court watch. There are articles, um, uh, extensive articles that talk about the impact. And there are also 3 articles I'll share with your group right now, Matthew, that they can read about the occupation. One of the first several articles that I had to read, and this is about the occupation and the apartheid system in Israel. So for those of you listening, and again, don't take my word for it, go read these articles. Take time. Amnesty International, Daily Evidence of an Apartheid. This is dated 2/1/22. The Anti-Defamation League, published 7/8/2021. Israel is an apartheid state. And then UN News, Israel's occupation of Palestinians' territory is an apartheid, 5/25/22. And it's interesting, you often talk to uh, Zionists and they'll say, well, we don't trust the UN. Well, if you don't trust the UN, then Israel's not a legal state because the UN is the one that adopted 181 that gave you the state to begin with under UNESCO. So those are 3 articles I would reference for you among hundreds and hundreds. And then listen to Miko Peled, Mikopelod, Norman Finkelstein, Chomsky, a ton of, and these are not all Israelis in the Jewish community who advocate for the Palestinian movement and to amplify our voices. And one of the last things I'll land on before I turn it back to you, man, I look, Palestinians have been talking about the atrocities for God knows how long. Look at the 2018 March of Return for peaceful protest. But it has not been until the exposure through this right-wing government of Israel that the allyship has grown tremendously and has lifted us and prompted us up as a people to amplify our voices. And so we appreciate that. I speak, at least for myself, I can't express enough gratitude for the allyship that we've gained, and sadly, at the expense of so many lives in Gaza. So, and I pray that extensive good comes out of this.
There's this one thing that I think about with the history and all of the things that you're talking about. Hold on, my granddaughter's throwing a fit.
It's all good.
One of the things that um, I think about in the history, and like even as you bring it forward to today and talking about, like what is currently happening. So we have Rafah, right?
Yeah,
That
Rafah
they made
border.
everybody go there. That's the safe place. And then now they're saying you're going to just drop leaflets the past couple days, right, telling them you have to evacuate, but there's nowhere to go because the border is closed,
Right.
right?
And there's no strategy. I've said this. So, and I want to take a step back. Remember the H going into the kibbutzim, and I'm going to share who lived in the kibbutzim was intended to exchange several thousand Palestinian hostages without that are being held without due process. And the Israelis that lived in the kibbutzim, and mind you, Israel had known about this a year plus, according to the New York Times article. The folks that lived in the kibbutzim Bier were Mizrahi Jews, the peacekeeping anti-war movement Jewish community, and some of the workforce. And so just keep that in mind. Under Bibi, so Bibi, under he was on the precipice of being ousted for indictments of fraud, embezzlement, and other legal matters, conspiring with media moguls to change the narrative. He was on the precipice of getting ousted because of various protests. And so this happens, and he convenes a war cabinet, and under their law, he stays in office. And so now, to get to your point, Maggie, about the Rafah border. So you tell all these Palestinians to get to the Rafah border, right? And you demolish over 70% of the infrastructure, accusing 70% of the infrastructure to be some sort of command center, some sort of hiding place for the H group. 70%, right? 70%, and yet you say this with the most advanced technology and the most moral army in the world, yet you can't find your hostages through your intelligence. But 70% of Gaza was headquartered for the H group. And you also argue that their command centers, like I served in the military, so and I have friends that have posted videos about command centers. What you saw is not a command center. For those of you interested in looking to see what a command center is, I would encourage you to type in command center so that you see the infrastructure and what it looks like. So now you're asking, 1 point something million Palestinians to go from the south to the north, a completely demolished part of the Gaza, nothing built, rubble, homes destroyed, hospitals destroyed, mosques, churches, universities, you name it, you name it. And then all of a sudden, you're going to move 1.2 million, 3 million people, and you have no plan. As according to spokespeople for Bibi and Bibi himself, I'm asking quote unquote, I'm asking the IDF to give me a detailed plan as to how they're going to move all these people into a completely empty space. Well, if you start bombing Rafah, then you destroy the humanitarian aid. It's a catastrophe because that's the border they come through. Not only has the U.S. opposed this, the Egyptians have opposed this, the UK has opposed this, and Saudi Arabia, who was going to normalize relations prior to October 7th, has said, if you do this, you pose a serious threat in this part of the world. And they're not going to normalize relations. And the Prince of Saudi Arabia says, we will no longer normalize relations with Israel until they give us a two-state solution, right? And so how can you move all these people, 1 point something million people, to the north of Gaza? Because you've got to build, look, I'm no military strategist, but critically thinking, I'm thinking, all right, that will take me probably a month or so, simply because and he's got to finish this by March 10th, this complete demolition of Gaza by March 10th. That's the deadline he's given. There's no tents. So they're living in tents now, getting humanitarian aid. But now you go to a completely blank landscape. You got to build tents. You got to provide electricity. There's no water. So you've got to provide resources to get water. You've got to find an alternative route for humanitarian aid to go through. And you got to move 1.3 million people with children, elderly that are ill, their belongings. Are they going to take them with them? You got to tear down the tents. This is just simply a way, and I've spoken about this quite a bit, and others have as well. This is a way for him to go back to the international community and say, it is unlivable in Gaza. We have to find a new home for them. Not Israel, not the West Bank. And so to, again, ethnically cleanse them from the land. And so, and you can see this, for those of you, I'm sure you watched the news, you've seen the conference a couple of weeks ago. that was hosted by various activists, and which included two of Bibi's cabinet, uh, Ben Itmer Gavir and Mostrich, who were talking about settlements to be built in Gaza. Settlements to be built in Gaza. They had the floor plans, had everything, and they're celebrating about it. And then you have Danielle Weiss, who does not shy away from talking about how excited she is about force displacing Palestinians so that they can settle in Gaza, and how she even said it. She thinks that Blinken is losing his mind, thinking that we're ever going to offer a two-state solution. And so and so which brings me to Article 2 of the Geneva Convention about intent of G-side. So you got rhetoric, right? You got the Minister of Agriculture who talks about NECBA 2.0. You have Gavir, Mostrich, the IDF who created a telegram to showcase their atrocities. Um, uh, and the most recent horrific story is a young girl, Hind, who was found in the car. Just heart wrenching. And so for the international community to sit idly by and not place any sanctions on this government just baffles me. Just baffles me. And so I truly do hope that Biden and his administration finally wake up, because he's not going to be voted in the office. I mean, that's a given. Wake up and say, all right, enough's enough. Sanctions are going to be imposed. We just gave him $14 billion. So I don't know. I think I'm dreaming at this point. But other countries need to step up and say, enough's enough. Israel, you went too far about 200, like 60 days ago, 70 days ago, 80 days ago.
Mhm.
Now now you've gone beyond what's acceptable. And here's the reality: the international community is setting a precedent by allowing this to happen. Because who's to say in the future that another individual like Bibi will not do the same thing to another people in another part of the globe? You're setting a precedence.
Well, you're making a really great point because right now in the UK, their prime minister, or I can't remember what his name is,
Sunak,
but he is,
Sunak,
yeah, he is now presenting legislation or whatever they call it over there, to prohibit protests for tea groups.
yeah,
And
yeah, he's a knucklehead
and
to say
yeah,
least.
and now and also that they will reform their education system, telling the story of Israel.
Yeah,
And
isn't
so
that
they're
always? It isn't that always the case though? Isn't that the narrative today? I mean, what's changing? Even more so, right?
and so that even like we have to think about that as Americans, that they're already proposing things. They passed a House resolution that said Zionist is the same as anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I
They
heard that.
started creating their own rules in which we should be concerned about, because even in our states, like my state, Kristi Noem passed or signed an executive order that prohibits us from participating in a BDS campaign or whatever. So if we are contractors or working for the state, we could lose our jobs if
Wow.
we protest or if we boycott. I'm glad I don't work for the state.
Yeah, you and me both. Um,
So we
it's
have those
ridiculous.
things happening.
No, it's just and it's ridiculous. And I think in alignment with that, for those, I don't know how many listeners you have, but you all have heard the statement from the river to the sea, and what the Western media says that it implies. Um, First of all, that's untrue. That's not what it implies about completely ethnically cleansing the Jewish community. But I would also tell you, look at the Likud Charter. The Likud Charter has the same statement: from the river to the sea, there should only be an ethno-Jewish state, right? Um, you've also heard, uh, you've also heard that the Hamas group, um, under their charter, wanted to completely annihilate the Jewish community. They updated their charter in 2017 to say that we want to live side by the Jewish community, but we want to have self determination and equality. You guys can look that up, and it was revised in 2017. But no one ever talks about that because they keep wanting to bring up the adverse part of what the Hamas group is, right? And so um, I think it's a moment in history for all of us, using these platforms, talking to our centers of influence, the shared reality of what's going on. What's truly happening to the journalists, the people of Gaza, the people of the West Bank. And there's a great article by the New York Times. It's an interview style format about the Oslo Accords, and it breaks it down in interview format, and there are hyperlinks in there that talk about the Oslo Accords and the articles embedded in the Oslo Accords from 1994 between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, and what the stipulations of the Oslo Accord were. And that Oslo Accord was only supposed to last for 5 years, but and one of the stipulations was to remove the settlements. One of the reasons that Yitzhak was assassinated was because of his commitment to removing settlements from the West Bank. But that's grown over, I think, 600, 800,000 settlements, right, in the West Bank today. And one of Yasser's downfalls as well, because he conceded at the core of everything that under all the peace treaties that the Palestinians wanted was to have right of return, so compensation. And under Resolution 194 that was established in December of 1948, I believe, uh, it, it was recommended that Palestinians have a right of return or compensation if they didn't want to return to the land. But why do you think it was a flash in the pan? So if Israel allowed right of return today, and for those that wanted to return, what do you think would happen? The demography would be out of balance again. You can't call it a Jewish state if there are more Palestinians, Christian, and Muslims in that state. There's no way they're going to do right of return. And so um, I heard a ridiculous story the other day, and I think these people were really trying to do this out of, I want to say, good nature of their heart. They're talking about a plan, a peace plan, and and it sounded like corporate America to me. And so this individual was talking about, this was an Israeli talking about, well, we could do this. We can drop pamphlets from the air, pamphlets, not leaflets, pamphlets about a reload package. A certain percentage can decide if they want to go to the West Bank, so we'll give them a reload package. They can go live there, and then we can have a certain percentage come to Israel. If they want to live in Israel, we'll give them a $400,000 reload package. And then the rest of them who don't want to go to West Bank or the Gaza Strip, we'll give them a relocation package of $100,000 to go anywhere they want in the globe. This is the kind of rhetoric that you hear on these lives. And I'm thinking to myself, you, so first of all, how big is your pamphlet that you're going to drop on people's heads? And you're not going to make a decision for the Israeli government. And anyone in the right mind, uh, to talk about relocation package is obviously nonsensical, and it's ethnic cleansing. Like to tout that in front of a large group and to say this is a thoughtful idea, to me just baffles me. No, how about putting in a government on both sides that's going to have self-determination, equality, right of return, allow people to come back, or compensation, build an airport, uh, open air and sea, right? Export, import, and see how that pans out versus dropping leaflets on people's heads or pamphlets that are probably going to be about 2 to 3 pounds. At what height are they coming down, and the speed and the amount of and the amount of velocity that's going to be coming down on your head? And so when I hear that, I'm like, man, I want to engage people to see if we can bridge gaps. And I was saddened by that conversation, so I left. And last night, I happened to fall on a conversation with an Israeli panel. And I normally don't jump on those panels. I just want to listen. What are they thinking? And I heard this gentleman, one of the most sensible gentlemen that I've heard in a long time. He was Jewish, and he had the decorum and demeanor and calmness of influencing an individual that I had seen on another panel that was screaming, shouting the entire time. Like, if he can influence this individual, this is someone to connect with. And so for the first time yesterday, I got up on the panel and I said, so and so, I'd love to connect with you. I think there's an opportunity for you and I to bridge gaps. I'd love to have you on my panel, just you and me talking, because oftentimes we go tit for tat and we go nowhere. It just tit for tat. Here's this. Your fault is this. Your fault is that. This time, I just want to have you come up and I want to know who you are, get to know me, and see how people react to them. Like you know me, I don't go up for debates. The only time I'll go up is if I'm having to share facts about the Nakba or if someone glosses over it or any other aspects that impact things. But to sit there on a panel for an hour or so just isn't my wheelhouse. And so I felt well, wow, this is God sent for me. Like, this was 12:30 at night while I'm getting ready to go to bed. And here's this gentleman talking calmly and collectively. And he talks about Liam, joining Liam's panels. And I said, all right, this was God sent. It's meant to be. I got to get up on this panel. I don't care what the consequences are. And he and I followed each other. So I'll DM him and say, like, you got to come. Let's talk. Um, and as calm and collected as he was, sadly, there had to be one individual to come up on the panel to try to distract the whole freaking event. And it's like, he's like, the dude was calm, collected, you try to rile him up. Let him say his piece. You don't agree? You want to tout your revisionist history? So be it. But respect him. He's an elder, right? Respect him. So there is hope, Maggie. There is. Just like you and I are talking today.
I think so too. I just always think back, and they say that from the river to the sea, and then they, want to make legislative action towards those words, and Elon Musk is gonna ban whoever says it on X, and that. And I often wonder if anybody ever recalls the saying, from sea to shining sea.
I remember that. I remember
Hmm.
that. What?
And
Where
so,
did we?
what does that mean? From sea to
Yeah.
shining sea. And
Uh,
who was here?
yeah. We're gonna colonize everybody from sea to shining sea. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna colonize every country from sea to shining. We're gonna have the imperialist world that and by different names. Look, I've been. I think what my parents did for us was afforded us opportunities that I don't know if we would have had in Jordan. I am grateful for that. My entire journey and my continued journey will be about coming from a place of curiosity, coming to learn, because my parents allowed me this opportunity, allowed my siblings. I will never take that for granted. So whatever I engage in that I feel that it's adverse or a difficult terrain, I always think back, if my parents came here very late in life with a few $100 in pocket and they took one of the most difficult risks to give us a better life, anything that I endure pales in comparison. And so and being in financial services for 30 years, I've learned so much from various people. Um, but now I think it's time for me to get on these platforms with people like you and others to educate, inform, learn, and be a mouthpiece, not only for the Palestinians, as I tell everyone, like, once our issue subsides and we do have the self-determination equality, then we need to align with other diverse groups that don't have the same opportunity. Um, and I'm grateful for that. It's where I feel I can do good, right? And as the platform grows and hopefully others join, I think we have a tremendous road ahead of us. Not an easy road, very difficult. As Van Gogh would say, normality is a paved road, no flowers grow on it. Um, Normality is a paved road. It's comfortable to walk, but no flowers grow on it. So nothing that we do is normal by any stretch of the imagination. So greatness, achieving our goals, changing the narrative requires a lot of elbow grease, a lot of time, and a long runway.
I agree. I agree. There's a question they're asking you, what is the population of Israel to Palestine?
So you have, I believe, roughly 6 million uh, Jews in Israel, proper Israel, what they call 20, and about 2 million Palestinians. So total eight in proper Israel. In Gaza, it's 2.3 million, 2.2 million. The West Bank, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we can pull that up. Uh, and so you have 6 million Jews, 2 million Palestinians, total of 8 million. And the number 20%, you'll read that in various books, folks, whoever asked that. That is the ideal number. Remember, 80% is what Ben Gurion aspired to have of the land.
Mhm.
And so 80-20 rule. So only having 20% of the population being Palestinian, Muslims, or Christians, that is the ideal number to have an ethnos religious state.
Yeah, and that's very similar even to America, like what they're doing. And even if people would even think about what is happening on the southern border, you have all the Mexicans who are South American, Central American people that are all on this line of the border trying to escape from whatever's happening in their homelands. And if you can think about that from the Palestinian perspective, that here they are, they're on this border trying to survive as well. That border is closed. Once they start attacking them, because Israel is going to do that within the next couple days. They already kind of are, but there's supposed to be a full-fledged assault.
Yeah,
Once that happens, where
yeah,
are
it's
they gonna
crazy.
go?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna. I, who God knows, and I just want to correct something. About 7.2 million are Jews, right? 7.2 million are Jews. Just and about 503,000 live in the West Bank. And so total population is 9,842,000. So you take 20% of that, roughly around 2 million of Palestinians. And so just to give an accurate number.
And the other thing with that is the misconception of like prior to Israel, there were Christians, there were
Oh yeah,
Muslims, and there were
and Jews.
Jewish people that all lived there.
Absolutely. Look, were there was there conflict? Of course, revolts, yes. And one of the attacks, as a matter of fact, was on the Iraqi refinery by the by one of the militias. I think it was the Irgun, where Jews and Palestinians were working together. They bombed the refinery, and so yeah, they were living together. But remember, they weren't Zionists. Zionist leadership led by Gurion, Herzl Gurion, eventually um, did were not part of that population in numbers, and so until the late 40s, in late early 40s, late early 40s, late 40s, you saw a large number of uh, immigration. And here's the thing: remember, I told you about Moshe Sharet and his commander abroad. So in his diaries and letters that he wrote to Moshe Sharet, he would say that, look, we're fearing a second Holocaust here. We need more Jews to immigrate to what we're going to call Israel or Israel. But in reality, when he spoke to his consultancy group, he had no problems. He had no reservations about what his abilities were in terms of expelling the Palestinians. None whatsoever. He knew he had it under control. But in the Western media, he wanted to paint what in the Western world he wanted to paint a different narrative. He feared that the Jewish community would be under attack again, as they were under under the mustache guy, right? Um, and so that's the false narrative that I think we've been fed this long time, which is fear. We've always been told in America it's the Palestinians. They're just a bunch of terrorists. They're attacking us all the time. Well, cause and effect, right? Read about the first Intifada. What caused that? Read about the second Intifada, right? When Ariel Sharon went to the Al Mosque mosque and a holy ground that caused a second Intifada. Read about the Israeli that ran over the Palestinians and unalived them, that ultimately led to the first Intifada and the various attacks. Look, and when civilians are involved, I have not seen combat, my brother has, but when civilians are involved as a result of officials having interest that only furthers their agenda, um, it's a tragedy, right? And we see this. We see this with Bibi. The I would not, I was telling my wife the other day, I'm like, I remember the stories about Mussolini, right? And what happened to Mussolini, but this guy has always, I mean, look, there's interviews, I think in the 70s with him, and the ask was, do you think the Palestinians should have a state? And he's like, no, they shouldn't. They can go to Jordan. They can go, to other parts of the world, other parts of the Middle East. So he has no intention of negotiating a two-state solution, even though Blinken, Kirby, all these guys talk about their demand for it, and it's at the detriment of Israel. That this is the landscape he's creating for his people, and
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think in that whole ideology of, like trying to figure out what is the resolution, and you have like these influencers that are pushing a two-state solution, and many of the Palestinians there now are saying they don't want a two-state, they just want a one-state, they want to be freed,
yeah,
they want
it's hard.
equality.
I think that let's remove the variable one to give us self determination, give them equality, and it's hard to determine for the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Like I don't live there. You and I don't live there. We talk about what's going on, but they feel what's going on. So the first thing that comes to mind was, well, what do you think of what kind of solution do you think? The only solution I'm thinking about right now is what's going to happen to Gaza. Then we can talk about the next steps, one step at a time. Because to tout what type of solution you want in terms of two state or one state is too premature. Because we already know that that's not what they want. But let's work on fixing the demolished Gaza. I was on a live before I connected with you with a journalist who took 14 years to build his home, saved up 14 years, right? And a lot of us do the same thing. But imagine all the sweat equity that went into building, saving money, and building that home. He doesn't have that anymore. Now the only thing he's worried about is staying alive and is keeping his kids alive and getting them out of Gaza. And he's got to raise money to do that. I think it's 2,500 for him for his kids, like 5,000 for and he's a journalist. And so he's not like a Motaz or Sen where they have huge followings. But I think the content creator that had him on the live is creating a platform so others can donate for him and money. And I think this content creator is just an amazing job platforming the journalist, because Sean King was on this platform before I left, and so were the father from the Furha family was on there. And so that's the experience that they're having, where you and I are having this conversation online. We can amplify their voices, but the emotional impact that they have pales in comparison to what we feel, right? It's like you can never do enough. You can never do enough. Um, and to think about 75 years of hatred and division that's been instilled, embedded in people's lives on both sides, how long will that take to dissipate? Right? How long will that take to go away? I heard a story the other day of a pediatrician who was a Hamas leader, who in 1956 saw his uncle get killed by the Israeli army. 1956, he was a young boy. Then he became a Hamas leader, and he was a pediatrician. Does that tell you how much he kept that hate in his heart? How long he said, "My God, you took my family away." Like the families that lost generations, the families that don't even exist on this face of the earth anymore in Gaza. The young girl Hind who just was found in the car after several days. No one knew where she was because of the tank attack. Who's going to forget that? What child losing his parents, his mom or dad, or losing his limbs or her limbs is going to ever forget that? The psychological trauma. Kids are dying from heart attacks because they can't stand the fear that's just overwhelming, right? Surgery without anesthesia, people drinking water from sewage, food at a very minimum. It's I forget what the cost was. It was $30. About okay, not 30. About before October 7th to buy a kilo of sugar, I think it was like $3. You know how much it costs today? $10. Inflation in a place where there's no way to make money. How? Because people are like, we got to barter. You need this, I need that. We gotta make a living. So we gotta eat. We gotta make a living somehow. People have to survive. You got these young kids making little goods with the amount of supplies they have to sell to families so they can help each other out. Young, where my kids and you have grandkids, will have a runway of growth that's exponential, right? Takes time. These kids have become adults in 120 days. And one of the journalists was sharing today, my daughter is 8 years old and she's been involved in 4 wars already. 8 years old, 4 wars. For the love of God, like who? And I look at my kids, they're sleeping still. And hey, look, it's Sunday, do your thing. But they'll never have to experience, God willing, they'll never experience that. And here we are, arguing tit for tat about no, it's not apartheid. Yes, it is apartheid. Like, dude, go read the articles that have been written by 1,000 different resources. So I I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox. Once you get me going, I don't stop.
I know, me too. I'm there.
How are your people reacting? Just so that I gauge how they.
You not a lot of questions. They're just like commenting about the things that you're talking about. Maybe comparisons back to us as a people.
Of course.
And there was one question about a little confused about the difference of whether this is a religious war or
Mm.
like what's the difference between Palestine, Jewish, Islam, Christianity, and Zionism. Are they all the same?
So Zionism is not a religion. It is it's an ideology to have an ethno state. Um, and it is not a religious war. I'm Christian, and the platform that I'm on normally is with Palestinians and Christians and allied Jews. So to say that is a religious war is a scapegoat of a response. It is a way to disconnect us from one another. Um, because I often say in the last 120 days, we all have stood in solidarity and unification to amplify the voices of the Palestinians. And there have been content creators on that platform and others have been doing this much longer, 2, 3 years, amplifying their voices. And what I said earlier about, man, it's the people are finally hearing us. It's as a result of the allies that have stood by side by side. There were Jews, there were Christians and Muslims living in Mandate Palestine. Mandate Palestine dates back to 12 BC, right? When it was called Philistia, on the outskirts of Syria. Eventually, turned into Philistine, and I forget who under the Roman Empire. It eventually became Palestine under the Ottoman Empire, the British Mandate, and there were Jews, there were Palestinians that were indigenous to the land. There were Jews that were indigenous to the land, the Mizrahi and the Sephardic, not the Ashkenazi. The Ashkenazi Jews are the European Jews that immigrated to that. So people argue that, but again, I don't want to. I think the argument tends to be indigeneity, but in the reality is again, if you were on the land 2,000, 3,000 years ago, but I own my home now, you have no right. It's a silly argument. You have no right to this land. I own the home. Like I've lived here 14 years, but for some reason, someone comes to my front doorstep and says, my family used to own this land back 1,000 years ago. It's passed on since then, but now you need to leave. I may have some choice words for you at that point. How's that a valid argument? And so the idea of it being a religious war is just a scapegoat because it is Islamophobic at its core. Because oftentimes people come up to those platforms and say, well, let's talk about Islam and how it's a bad religion. No, it's not about being Muslim. It's not about being Christian. It is about the people and the humanity of the people, right? So we have to remove that conversation is null and void on this topic. And so I appreciate the question though.
I agree. I agree. We're past our hour, but
Yes, we are.
I never worry about it because it's usually always a good thing. But I know you're a busy person too, and you have other things to do. For those of you who do have TikTok, he is JBS TikTok Dad. He does he goes live. He has live for financial matters. So if you have financial questions, he does that. He has a live for a book club. And we are currently doing this book, if I can get it to show. I don't know. There it is.
Yep, right there. Perfect.
So we are currently reading that book, and he does. You're doing that on
Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7:40
Tuesdays and
p.m.
Thursdays,
Pacific Standard Time.
and now he is doing fitness on Fridays. So if you want to have a workout partner, him and his wife are doing fitness on Fridays. So I would suggest that you find him on TikTok and follow him. And he does a lot of engaging conversation. He also, you'll find him, I do find him sitting on other live panels where he's talking about these things as well. So,
Thank you.
JBS, I want to thank you for coming on,
Thanks, Maggie. I appreciate it.
sharing.
It's my pleasure. Guys, if you don't follow Maggie, I met Maggie, like I said, a couple of months ago when I was doing banking tips, and her and a few others have been the catalyst behind the platform. And so I appreciate you in inviting me. I'm so glad I was able to come up on this. I love doing this. I think we each have our gifting, and God has given us a gift. And for me to be able to connect with people and share information and learn from them has just been godsend. So thank you for this, Maggie. I appreciate you all for listening. Have a blessed day. Enjoy. Get healthy, and go hang out with your grandbaby. We'll chat later. Bye, Maggie.
Doksha.
Thank you.